For those of you who followed Exile back when he actively made content, some of his most popular videos were ironically on the least popular champions in the game like Yorick and old Aatrox. Obscure as they were, it's definitely fascinating to look through their history to see what exactly was holding them back. Across the 170-something champions in League, there's bound to be some that aren't frequently played, usually as a result of a more unconventional playstyle like say Quinn or Singed. But that doesn't necessarily come at the expense of practicality, as those two for example can be very competent picks when piloted correctly. What exactly determines if a champion falls beyond the realm of saving though? What would be the criteria for distinguishing between unconventional but effective like Bard and just plain non-viable like Gold Yorick? Well, there just so happens to be a prime example of such a champion that we can look into, and it's one that I think very much needs to be addressed in light of her supposedly being the next CGU target. Heaven only knows when it will actually come out though, considering the extreme length of time it took for Skarner to get reworked. For today we'll be taking a deep dive into Shyvana and how Riot basically completely forgot about her. Shyvana's a champion that at first glance would have you believe she's got quite a bit going for her in a manner that's digestible for any type of player, no matter the skill level. It may even be too straightforward. She belonged to a cohort of champions back in the day that were known as duelists. As the name implies, they excel in head-on confrontation in single combat, possessing the tools conducive to beating someone before they beat you. There were quite a lot of them: Xin Zhao, Jax, Fiora, Tryndamere, Aatrox, Nocturne, Olaf, Shyvana, Trundle, Warwick, Master Yi, Irelia, Udyr. They essentially all play the same exact way: walk up to someone and beat them with auto attacks. Minor gimmicks were assigned to each cast member to add a bit of nuance to them. Jax had Counter-Strike, Tryndamere was a crit spamming attacker, Irelia was the gap close resetter, Aatrox and Warwick had lifesteal, Olaf had crowd control immunity, Trundle stole your stats, so on and so forth. In an effort to diversify the champion pool, throughout the past decade, Riot attempted to widen that gap in properties between the champions, reworking a number of them to not even be duelists anymore. Xin Zhao is more of a diver who does a mixture of ability and auto attack damage. Fiora no longer spams auto attacks and on hits, now she dances around you and deals true damage. Aatrox was totally reformatted into a full-on ability caster. Warwick has become more of a pursuit-based diver. For more than half of the aforementioned list, you'd be hard-pressed to compare them to the likes of Tryndamere and Trundle anymore. A good thing, mind you, every champion should have a distinct identity to them. Where does Shyvana fall in all of this though? Therein lies the premise of the video. Curiously, though she was part of the same category of picks that simply ran at you and beat you to death, an argument can be made that Shyvana was one of the more intricate ones in that department thanks to her ultimate, transforming her into a full-on dragon with augmented abilities. Certainly more interesting than that of other steroid ultimates like Jax gaining bonus armor and magic resist, or Tryndamere becoming basically invincible. The idea behind Shyvana was that she was meant to be noticeably weaker than her peers while in her base form. However, upon transforming, her power level would increase to a point where she could realistically outduel anyone on even ground, or potentially turn into a teamfight raid boss on account of all of her attacks gaining more AoE. The rest of her kit went as follows. Twin Bite was an empowered basic attack that would strike twice, applying on-hit effects twice. While in Dragon form, her Q would become an AoE, applying the same damage and on-hit effects to everyone around the primary target. Fairly common to see an auto attack reset on a duelist champion. It was the same idea as Jax W, Trundle Q, Xin Zhao Q, and whatnot. Most duelists also had some form of increased tempo or mobility. In Shyvana's case, she had Burnout, a flame aura created around her that damaged all nearby enemies and caused her auto attacks to do pulsing on and AoE magic damage. More importantly, she would gain a burst of speed upon cast, and you could extend the duration of Burnout from 3 to 7 seconds by attacking enemies. While in Dragon form, the radius of the attack would increase proportionally to her larger size, and although it was taken away during her mini rework in 6.23, it used to leave behind a trail of fire that would deal damage to enemies over time. Then we have Flame Breath, the fireball that stopped on the first enemy champion struck that dealt magic damage to all nearby enemies and applied a mark on them, wherein basic attacks against a mark enemy would do % health magic damage, complemented very nicely by her Q applying on-hit effects twice in quick succession. Prior to a mini rework, Shyvana's Dragon form E used to shoot out 3 fireballs in a cone, allowing her to mark even more enemies. Post-rework, the fireball would instead explode to deal even more damage and leave an area of fire that burned enemies over time. The premise of Shyvana was simple. You would throw Flame Breath on someone, then activate Burnout to get closer to them, and then weave in Twin Bite while auto-attacking to beat them to death. It was an extremely simple playstyle, one that, despite her interesting premise, caused many to view her as too one-dimensional. Transforming into a giant dragon didn't really do anything to alleviate that either, as all it did was make her attacks bigger. It wasn't like other transformations where she would acquire a new set of abilities. Why this was so problematic is that by all accounts, Shyvana was effectively one of the few champions in the game who could be replaced by someone else. There was no practical incentive for one to play her over literally any of her peers. For all intents and purposes, Jax was an infinitely better Shyvana by virtue of a dash and AoE crowd control. Tryndamere was the better Shyvana for also having a dash and granting death immunity to himself. Shyvana had, or should I say still has, no consistent form of either crowd control or mobility, funnily enough making her one of the worst duelists in the game on paper. Even regarding hybrid damage, other duelists could also do some semblance of it like Jax, Trundle, and Warwick, percent health damage as well. The moment a duelist champion bought Blade of the Ruined King, they could do percent health damage at any time. From an experiential standpoint, Shyvana had nothing that made her stand out from her peers. Ordinarily, a champion's passive is partly responsible for determining their playstyle or gimmick, but that wasn't an option for Shyvana either, as the only thing it did was give her bonus armor and magic resist. That's it. Later on, they gave her the additional property of doing bonus damage to dragons, but the irony is, many other champions can take out dragon faster than she can, even with that bonus. Despite such a one-dimensional kit though, Shyvana did have something her peers didn't, durability, or rather the freedom to build it. While most other duelist champions had to build 2 or 3 DPS items to scale into late game, Shyvana only really needed 1. She could go Blade of the Ruined King, or Hylofear, or Blood Razor, whatever you wanted, and then basically go full tank, letting her be significantly tankier while simultaneously posing a DPS threat to the enemy team. Furthermore, back when there wasn't that much mobility, Shyvana's burnout, especially when extended, made her pretty hard to run away from. In other words, she was more popular during the early 2010s because in relativity to everyone else, Shyvana was faster and bulkier than the competition. As we know though, she wouldn't age very gracefully. In addition to new champions coming out with increasing capabilities, one after another Shyvana's peers began to develop more playmaking potential. Fiora, Aatrox, Irelia, Warwick. Through VGUs, they gained entirely new playstyles. Meanwhile, mid-scopes given to Olaf, Shinjal, and Jax afforded marginally more modernized kits, giving them better skill expression or scenario coverage. All the while, Shyvana was becoming more and more obsolete. Her straightforward playstyle of walking up to enemies and beating them down was becoming less appealing and, more importantly, less effective, especially with the inclusion of new, more powerful 1v1 auto-attack based champs like Gwen, Bel'Veth, and Viego, alongside the rise of rushdown champions like Kled, Camille, Sylas, Yone, Briar, and Ambessa, who were similarly 1v1 champions but could bulldoze you with incredible mobility and front-loaded damage. It made Shyvana by comparison feel like a downgraded version of just about every other possible candidate in League. In response to that, people tried to adopt a more unusual approach to Shyvana, capitalizing on the hybrid ratios in her E and Ultimate to go for an AP Dragon-focused win condition. The change to her Flame Breath becoming an exploding fireball also came within a monstrous AP ratio, which at its highest point in 8.9 was I believe like a 120-130% AP ratio, coupled with the fact that Dragon's Descent also had a staggering 130% to it. Given that was what people were looking into, the Valve team decided to play into that by adding more AP scaling in her kit. Version 11.3 oversaw bonus AP scaling added to her Q and W, the latter in particular giving Shyvana some of the best tempo in the late game since with enough ability haste, she could gain a decaying boost of up to 90% movement speed or higher every 8 seconds or less. At 40% CDR, Burnout could have infinite uptime assuming you were extending it through auto attacks. She basically turned into a hyper-tempo torpedo bomber in dragon form, firing long-range AoE projectiles that could chunk any squishy target for half HP, if not more. Comboing Dragon Descent into an Empowered Flame Breath was enough to nearly one-shot anyone without a modicum of health or magic resist. Credit where it's due, it was effective. All the same, it wasn't Shyvana. Neither her AD nor her AP playstyle really fits into the half-dragon motif she was meant to portray. In fact, hardly anything about her screams dragon. What's been negatively affecting Shyvana for her entire career is that Riot has no idea what to do with her in her current state. What exactly is she supposed to be? Should she be a typical tanky juggernaut who runs at you and beats you down slowly, or should she be a fire-breathing artillery mage who constantly chucks fireballs at you from a distance? It's hard to really figure something out for her. Compared to Smolder and Aesol who are full dragons, Shyvana's a half-dragon. However you're supposed to transcribe that into gameplay is more nebulous of a concept to navigate. Like I said, back in League's early days it worked out because circumstantially Shyvana was actually quite good. She was the less mobile but tankier version of all the other 1v1 champs like Tryndamere, Fiora, Master Yi and such. And her more simplistic, fairly low-risk playstyle made her an easy jungler to pick up, especially during the Hylofear meta given how fast you could clear camps with her. Be that as it may, all of those were essentially distractions to keep our attention away from the fact that her kit just sucks. And with design standards having been elevated year after year, more 1v1 champs coming out who could do all sorts of crazy things, the competition has progressed quite a bit. Meanwhile, Shyvana hasn't. On one hand, trying to bounce her to be an AD bruiser would be ill-advised. As stated, Shyvana was a strong jungler purely because of the fact that after AFK farming for 20 minutes and stacking Hylofear, she would be nigh indestructible, dealing tons of hybrid damage, which back then was extremely difficult to itemize against, all while being insanely tanky as a result of only needing to build one DPS item, Hylofear, and then going full tank afterwards. She would outright stat check all of her peers, and then be this gigantic raid boss in teamfights tearing people to shreds. When you take into account the fact that outside of fighting in dragon form, Shyvana was effectively non-existent, it led to a degenerate playstyle wherein she would offer zero presence around the map in the early to mid-game, as was the case for all Hylofear junglers. Making her on-hit build more effective would create a similar situation again. She would just be way too strong and way too tanky. Why? Because there's nothing else she can do except walk up to someone and auto-attack them to death. You can't play into anything else. Shyvana's kit is so devoid of nuance that you can't possibly go anything else. Fury the Dragonborn is the most nothing burger of a passive, literally just armor and magic resist. It does absolutely nothing. Shyvana's also one of the few champions in the game without any form of meaningful crowd control in her kit, not even a slow. Before you say her ultimate, it's one of the most inconsistent knockbacks in the game. You have to be standing on top of her to suffer the full knockback. Being even slightly to the left or right of her might cause you to get knocked aside. There really just isn't a whole lot you could do with this approach. On the other hand, playing Shyvana for AP can be a more practical option. Flame Breath carries a lot of pressure when considering the base damage, the scaling, and the damaging AoE it leaves behind, but with this approach you're essentially acknowledging the fact that you're next to useless in base form, only able to fight whenever you have ultimate available. This also presents another balancing issue where if Shyvana can't two-shot someone with Flame Breath, she's complete garbage. But if she can two-shot with Flame Breath, there's not a whole lot of counterplay. Compared to other unorthodox long-range AP poke builds of the past like AP Kai'Sa or AP Zeri, landing Flame Breath is way easier than landing either Ultra Shock Laser or Void Seeker. Kai'Sa's W is kept in check by being a small projectile and only hitting one enemy, while Zeri's W has a cast delay if you want to land the Wall Strike version, but even then they had to nerf it because it was doing too much damage at too safe a distance. Same applies to Shyvana's E. Flame Breath could chunk entire teams for a ridiculous amount of damage. That's why Shyvana's E keeps getting buffed and nerfed. Most recently in 14.20 and 14.23 they had to nerf it for being too overtuned. You couldn't really punish her for torpedo spamming at you since she would also be incredibly fast with her W and just run away, not a very interactive playstyle. People often call to Wild Rift Shyvana as a temporary mid-scope they could do for her, and to its credit, Wild Rift Shyvana has some more flavor to it with the whole evolution thing they got going on, allowing for more consistent power progression over the course of the game instead of being useless half the time and OP the other half. Thing is, the pressing concern with this champion is that she just doesn't really do anything. Not only does her kit lack any semblance of playmaking potential, but its range of applications are just so limited that it's difficult to theorize a scenario where you would want to have her specifically. At the very least, for other stat checkers, there's a use case where their particular repertoire presents a ton of merit, for example Nasus, a stat checker but he has amazing side lane pressure and can completely screw over any attack speed reliant champion through Wither, of which top lane has quite a few of them. Mundo is a stat checker to end all stat checkers, but he's a big body who can regenerate like crazy and stack tons of health, countering teams without any means of dealing % health damage, and his passive can allow him to shrug off any major crowd control from the enemy team like a Blitz Hook, Morgana Binding, Ash Arrow, what have you. Though both Nasus and Mundo also have the same issue of just running towards the champion and smacking away at them, they still carry meaningful utility or use cases that give you a reason to want to pick them. Unfortunately for Shyvana, she simply doesn't have anything like that, and I think Riot became aware of this a long time ago, hence why they haven't really done anything to fix her up like give her a proper mid-scope the same way they did for champions like Olaf, Ahri, Aatrox pre-rework, and so on. The only solution to Shyvana is a full VGU, completely throw her in the trash and start over. Again, supposedly she's intended to be the next target for a VGU, but as I elaborated about in my video on No More Reworks, a Shyvana VGU is unlikely to come anytime soon. Visual gameplay updates inherently burn through a lot of money without much of an ROI. Altogether, I don't think I'm being too presumptuous in assuming Riot effectively abandoned Shyvana. I really hope they didn't. In fact, I hope this video ages like milk and the day I upload it, a VGU teaser comes out. But for the time being, that is where Shyvana currently stands. She is arguably the least popular champion in League of Legends at the moment. Anyway, what do you guys think about Shyvana? Do you think there's a way they can salvage the current version of her, or do you agree that a VGU might be the only solution? Let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other champion discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.